Lady, don't play games with me, Sergeant Mark Dalton sneered, yanking the worn leather folder from the black woman's hands and throwing it onto the courthouse steps. Documents scattered across the concrete as attorneys and reporters stopped to stare. You really expect me to believe a black woman dressed like this belongs anywhere near a federal judge? He laughed. People like you usually come here begging for mercy, not walking through the front entrance. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Dalton stepped even closer, looking her up and down with open contempt. Look at those bargain store shoes, he scoffed. I've seen janitors with a better dress code. You should be looking for the cleaning entrance, not the judge's entrance. The plaza fell eerily quiet. Then he smirked one last time. Go ahead, Officer Briggs. Put the cuffs on her. Maybe spending a few hours in a holding cell will teach her that pretending to be important doesn't make a black woman important. Officer Ethan Briggs hesitated for only a heartbeat before pulling out his handcuffs. Ma'am, place your hands behind your back. Without anger or fear, the woman calmly complied. If this is how justice greets strangers, she said softly, then justice itself is about to be tested. The steel cuffs snapped shut. At that exact moment, a convoy of black government SUVs swept through the courthouse gates. Federal marshals rushed forward, but one senior court administrator stopped dead in his tracks, his face draining of color the instant he saw the woman standing in handcuffs. His horrified voice echoed across the silent plaza. Who handcuffed Judge Naomi Carter? Officer Briggs felt the world stop spinning. Before this unbelievable story continues, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. If you believe every person deserves dignity until the truth is known, subscribe and stay with us, because the next few minutes will change everything. Only 2 hours earlier, the plaza outside the Charlotte Federal Courthouse had been quiet enough to hear the fountain splashing against polished granite. The morning sun reflected off the glass facade as employees streamed through the security entrance, each one focused on another ordinary workday. Lawyers rehearsed arguments under their breath. Clerks hurried inside, carrying thick case files. Reporters adjusted camera equipment while waiting for the biggest judicial ceremony the city had seen in years. Inside the security office, Officer Ethan Briggs stood perfectly still as Sergeant Mark Dalton inspected his uniform from head to toe. You ironed the shirt. Good. Dalton brushed an invisible speck of lint from Ethan's shoulder before taking a step back. But don't confuse looking like a police officer with acting like one. Yes, Sergeant. This courthouse isn't some neighborhood traffic stop. Politicians walk through these doors. Billionaires walk through these doors. Federal judges walk through these doors. One mistake. Dalton leaned closer. And your career dies before it ever begins. Ethan nodded. Fresh out of the academy at just 24 years old, he had dreamed about wearing the badge since he was a teenager. His father had spent 28 years in law enforcement, always reminding him that the badge represented discipline before authority. But Ethan wanted something more. He wanted to prove himself. Today was his first assignment protecting a federal judicial ceremony, and he intended to leave an unforgettable impression. Dalton gathered the morning briefing team. Listen carefully. A newly appointed chief federal judge will arrive sometime before 9 o'clock. One officer raised a hand. Do we know what the judge looks like? Dalton shrugged. Not really. Another officer frowned. No photograph? Need to know information. The room filled with puzzled looks. Dalton continued. Security has been tightened because we've received anonymous threats over the past week. Nobody gets through without verification. I don't care if they're wearing a $1,000 suit or dirty sneakers. He looked directly at Ethan. And if your instincts tell you something's wrong, I act. You act immediately. Those words echoed in Ethan's mind long after the briefing ended. Across the city, a dark blue hybrid sedan quietly entered an underground parking garage several blocks from the courthouse. Naomi Carter turned off the engine and remained seated for a moment. At 56, she carried herself with quiet confidence rather than visible authority. Her neatly tied natural hair showed a few strands of silver. She wore a modest navy cardigan over a simple cream blouse, inexpensive slacks, and comfortable walking shoes that had clearly seen years of use. Nothing about her appearance suggested that within hours she would become one of the most powerful judges in the federal district. She preferred it that way. Her longtime judicial assistant, Rebecca Lawson, looked over from the passenger seat. We still have time to change your mind. Naomi smiled gently. If I arrive surrounded by security and official vehicles, everyone behaves perfectly. Rebecca Sahil. And if you arrive like everyone else, we discover how people are really treated. Rebecca had worked beside Naomi for nearly 12 years. She knew better than to argue once Naomi had made a decision. Naomi believed justice was never measured by how institutions treated powerful people. Justice revealed itself through the way ordinary people were treated when no one believed they mattered. That belief had shaped every ruling she had ever written. She picked up a plain leather folder containing only routine paperwork. Her official judicial credentials remained locked inside Rebecca's briefcase. "You still aren't carrying your identification," Rebecca warned. "I won't need it." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You sound very confident." "I have faith in professional judgment." Neither woman knew how severely that faith would be tested. Meanwhile, Ethan watched hundreds of visitors pass through the courthouse entrance. Most interactions lasted less than 30 seconds. Identification, metal detector, bag inspection, move along. Everything felt almost disappointingly routine. Dalton seemed irritated by the lack of excitement. "Stay alert," he reminded everyone every few minutes. "The quiet ones are usually the problem." At exactly 8:37 a.m., Ethan noticed a woman walking alone across the plaza. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't talking on a phone. She simply observed everything around her, the security checkpoints, emergency exits, surveillance cameras, and the flow of people entering the building. Ethan frowned. Why would someone pay attention to security cameras? Dalton noticed her a second later. "You see that?" Ethan nodded. "She's looking at every entrance." "Exactly." Naomi continued walking at an unhurried pace, occasionally smiling politely at courthouse employees who passed by. Most smiled back without recognizing her. She reached the bottom of the courthouse staircase just as a gust of wind scattered several sheets of paper from a young law student's backpack. Without hesitation, Naomi bent down and helped gather every page before handing them back with a warm smile. "Thank you so much," the nervous student said. "Good luck today," Naomi replied. The student hurried inside. Dalton watched the entire exchange with narrowed eyes. "Interesting. What is?" Ethan asked. "She's buying trust." Ethan looked uncertain. "You think so? I've been doing this 23 years. Dalton folded his arms. People planning something always try to look harmless first. The seed of suspicion had been planted. Ethan looked back toward the calm black woman now approaching the main security entrance. She carried no expensive briefcase, no security escort, no visible credentials, just a weathered leather folder and the quiet confidence of someone who seemed entirely comfortable walking into one of the most secure buildings in the city. Dalton spoke without taking his eyes off her. "Briggs. Sir? She's yours." Ethan inhaled slowly. His first real test had finally arrived. Completely unaware that every decision made over the next few minutes would change dozens of lives, he stepped forward, blocking Naomi Carter's path before she reached the courthouse doors. Their eyes met for the very first time. Neither of them looked away. Officer Ethan Briggs took one deliberate step forward, placing himself directly between Naomi Carter and the courthouse entrance. "Good morning, ma'am," he said professionally. "I'll need to see your identification before you enter." Naomi stopped only a few feet away. She offered a polite smile that neither challenged nor intimidated him. "Of course." She opened her weathered leather folder, then paused. "I seem to have left my photo identification with my assistant." Ethan's expression stiffened. "I'm afraid I can't allow anyone inside without valid identification." "I understand." There was no frustration in her voice. "I can call my assistant. She'll be here in a few minutes." Before Ethan could answer, Sergeant Mark Dalton walked over with slow, confident strides. "So," Dalton said, folding his arms, "what's the delay?" "She doesn't have identification," Ethan replied. Dalton looked Naomi up and down with open suspicion. "No ID? I'm waiting for my assistant to bring it." Dalton let out a short laugh. "Funny how that's always the excuse." Naomi remained composed. "I assure you, officer, I have legitimate business inside this courthouse." Dalton tilted his head. "Oh, I'm sure you do." He took the folder from Naomi's hands without asking and flipped through the papers. Nothing, just printed schedules, handwritten notes, and several pages of legal observation. No identification, no official credentials, no government badge. Dalton snapped the folder shut. "What exactly is your business here?" "I have an appointment." "With whom?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that." Dalton smirked. Convenient answer. A few lawyers walking toward the entrance slowed their pace. The conversation was beginning to attract attention. Ethan noticed it too. His pulse quickened. Dalton handed the folder back with obvious contempt. "You know what I think?" Naomi said nothing. "I think you're hoping somebody important walks by and lets you slip in." "I'm not hoping for anything." "No?" "No." Dalton's smile faded. "Then answer a simple question." He stepped closer. "What's your full name?" Naomi met his eyes. "I'd prefer to speak with courthouse administration." Dalton laughed loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "There it is." He looked toward Ethan. Classic avoidance. Several people nearby exchanged uneasy glances. One elderly attorney quietly whispered to another, "She's being remarkably calm." His colleague nodded. Too calm. Ethan felt torn. Everything about the woman's behavior seemed respectful. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't argued. She hadn't tried to force her way inside. Yet Dalton's warnings echoed relentlessly inside his head. "Trust your instincts. Act immediately. Don't hesitate." Dalton suddenly pointed toward the surveillance cameras mounted above the entrance. "I watched you." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You spent several minutes studying every security camera around this building." "I was observing the architecture." "The architecture? I appreciate public buildings." Dalton scoffed. "That's not what I saw." He turned toward Ethan. "What does academy training teach you?" Ethan answered automatically. "Suspicious surveillance of security infrastructure can indicate pre-operational planning." "Exactly." Dalton looked back at Naomi. "You've been watching entrances. I've been observing. You've been evaluating security. I noticed details." The sergeant spread his hands dramatically toward the gathering crowd. "See?" He turned to Ethan again. "Normal visitors don't inspect camera locations." Naomi spoke calmly. "Professional people often do." Dalton ignored her. Instead, he noticed something else. Her shoes. Scuffed. Comfortable. Far from expensive. He shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. "You expect us to believe someone dressed like this has official business in a federal courthouse?" Several people lowered their eyes. The remark made even Ethan uncomfortable. Naomi answered with remarkable dignity. "My clothing doesn't determine my purpose." "No," Dalton replied coldly, "but it tells people plenty." Silence settled over the entrance. Even the reporters nearby stopped talking. One young courthouse employee quietly pulled out her phone, not to record, to call someone inside. She wasn't sure why. Something about the interaction felt wrong. Dalton noticed the phone. "No recording," he barked. The employee quickly lowered it. Naomi watched the exchange without saying a word. Then she looked back at Ethan. "Officer Briggs." He blinked. "I don't remember telling you my name." "You introduced yourself when you approached." He searched his memory. She was right. He had. "You seem observant." "I try to be." Her answer was simple, honest, almost kind. For a brief moment, Ethan questioned everything. Maybe this was nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding. Maybe they should simply wait for her assistant. He opened his mouth. "Sergeant, perhaps we could—" Dalton cut him off instantly. "No." He lowered his voice. "This is your first major assignment. I know, so don't lose your nerve now. I'm just saying, listen carefully." Dalton leaned close enough that only Ethan could hear. "If she walks through those doors and turns out to be a threat," he let the sentence hang in the air. "Your career ends today." Ethan swallowed. The words struck exactly where Dalton intended. Fear replaced doubt. At that exact moment, Rebecca Lawson's phone vibrated inside the parking garage several blocks away. Traffic had completely stopped because of an unexpected vehicle accident. She glanced anxiously at the dashboard clock. 8:04 a.m. "I'm going to be late," she whispered. Back at the courthouse, Naomi quietly folded her hands in front of her. "I'm willing to wait." Dalton frowned. "For what?" "My assistant." "Not happening. I've done nothing wrong. We'll decide that." Another courthouse employee emerged from inside carrying a stack of ceremony programs. He froze. Something about the woman's face looked strangely familiar. Before he could think further, Dalton waved him away. "Keep moving." The employee hesitated, then reluctantly continued inside. Naomi noticed. So did Ethan. Neither spoke. The plaza had become unusually quiet. People weren't leaving anymore. They were watching, waiting, sensing that something important was unfolding. Dalton finally lost what little patience remained. "Officer Briggs." "Yes, Sergeant." "Detain her." Ethan stared at Naomi. She didn't move. She didn't plead. She didn't even sigh. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes with an expression that was almost sympathetic. "If you truly believe that's necessary," she said softly, "then do what you believe your duty requires." Ethan reached slowly toward the handcuffs on his duty belt. His fingers wrapped around the cold steel. For reasons he couldn't explain, they suddenly felt far heavier than they had only moments before. Officer Ethan Briggs slowly removed the handcuffs from his duty belt. For one last moment, he searched the black woman's face for any sign of panic. There was none. Instead, Naomi Carter stood with remarkable composure, her hands resting calmly in front of her. She looked less like someone facing arrest than someone quietly observing a lesson unfold. "Ma'am," Ethan said, his voice noticeably softer than before. "Please place your hands behind your back." Several people in the crowd exchanged nervous glances. One elderly attorney stepped forward. "Officer, isn't this a little excessive? She hasn't threatened anyone." Sergeant Mark Dalton immediately raised his hand. "Sir, stay out of police business." The attorney frowned. "I've practiced law in this courthouse for 30 years. I've never seen someone detained simply because she forgot her identification." Dalton's expression hardened. "And today isn't the day to start questioning my officers." The attorney reluctantly stepped back, but not before shaking his head in disbelief. Naomi looked at Ethan. "If this is your decision, I won't resist." Ethan hesitated, only for a second. Then he gently guided her hands behind her back. The metallic click echoed across the plaza. One cuff, then the other. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. A young mother standing nearby instinctively covered her daughter's eyes. Another bystander whispered. She never even argued. Within seconds, nearly every phone in the plaza was recording. Dalton glanced around with satisfaction. "Good," he said loudly. "Let everyone see that nobody is above security procedures." Naomi calmly answered without raising her voice. "Security and humiliation are not the same thing, Sergeant." Dalton laughed. "Humiliation?" He pointed toward the courthouse entrance. "You created this scene by refusing to cooperate. I offered to wait for my assistant. You refused to identify yourself. I requested courthouse administration. You refused a direct question. I exercised discretion. Every answer remained measured. Every response remained respectful." The contrast only made Dalton appear more aggressive. Ethan shifted uneasily. Something no longer felt right. He had arrested people during academy simulations. They shouted. They resisted. They argued. This woman did none of those things. She simply stood quietly, almost as though she already knew how everything would end. A television reporter slowly approached the police line. "Sergeant Dalton, may we ask why this woman has been detained? No comment. Has she been charged? No comment. Was a weapon found?" Dalton stared at the reporter. "I said no comment." The camera remained rolling. Across the plaza, Rebecca Lawson gripped the steering wheel in frustration. Traffic had completely stopped. Emergency vehicles blocked 2 intersections ahead. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from courthouse administration. Her stomach tightened. She dialed Naomi. No answer. "Come on," she whispered. Back outside the courthouse, another employee hurried through the front doors carrying a clipboard. His eyes widened the instant he saw Naomi. He slowed his pace. "I know her from somewhere." Before he could get closer, Dalton stepped directly into his path. "Inside." "But sergent," I said inside. The employee reluctantly obeyed. Naomi noticed everything. Every face, every hesitation, every opportunity people had to intervene, and every reason they chose not to. She wasn't angry. She looked saddened, as though she had witnessed this kind of silence before. Ethan quietly cleared his throat. "Sergent?" "What? Should we at least verify whether someone from courthouse administration knows her?" Dalton shot him a cold look. "You doubting your own arrest already?" "I'm just following procedure." "I am procedure." The answer landed heavily. Several people in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable looks. A middle-aged woman muttered under her breath. "That's exactly the problem." Dalton heard her. "You have something to say, ma'am?" She quickly looked away. "No." "That's what I thought." The atmosphere grew heavier by the minute. Nobody wanted to leave. Nobody wanted to speak. Yet no one could stop watching. A courthouse janitor quietly approached Naomi carrying a bottle of water. "Ma'am, you look like you could use this." Before Naomi could answer, Dalton intercepted him. "Take it back. She's been standing here 20 minutes. I said take it back." The elderly janitor looked embarrassed. He lowered the bottle and slowly walked away. Naomi watched him leave. Then she looked toward Ethan. "Kindness should never require permission." Those words struck Ethan harder than any accusation could have. He suddenly remembered something his late father had told him during the police academy graduation. "Son, the badge gives you authority. Your character decides how you use it." For the first time that morning, Ethan wondered whether authority and judgment had begun drifting apart. Then the unmistakable sound of sirens echoed through downtown Charlotte. Every head turned. A convoy of black government SUVs rolled toward the courthouse entrance with flashing lights. Federal marshals exited first. Behind them came senior officials from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, followed by members of the Judicial Security Division. Dalton smiled confidently. Perfect timing. Ethan frowned. "For what?" "They'll appreciate that we stopped a potential security threat before their VIP arrived." The convoy came to a sudden stop. One distinguished gray-haired administrator stepped out, adjusting his suit before scanning the entrance. He smiled. "Excellent. We made it just in time." His smile disappeared almost instantly. His eyes locked onto the black woman standing peacefully in handcuffs. The color drained from his face. He froze. The folder slipped from his hands and hit the pavement. No. He began walking, then running. Several federal marshals followed without understanding why. Dalton stepped forward to intercept them. "Good morning, gentlemen. Situation is under control." The administrator ignored him completely. His horrified gaze never left Naomi. When he finally reached the police line, his voice cracked loudly enough for the entire silent plaza to hear. "My God." He looked directly at Ethan. "Who authorized putting Judge Naomi Carter in handcuffs?" The words struck like thunder. Every conversation stopped. Every camera remained fixed on Ethan. Dalton's confident smile vanished. Ethan felt his heartbeat disappear beneath the crushing weight of a single realization. The calm black woman he had arrested wasn't trying to enter the courthouse. She belonged at the very center of it. No one moved. For several long seconds, the entire courthouse plaza seemed frozen in place. Officer Ethan Briggs stared at the distinguished court administrator, convinced he had misheard. "Judge Carter?" he whispered. The administrator didn't answer immediately. His horrified eyes remained fixed on the steel handcuffs locked around Naomi Carter's wrists. He rushed forward. "Your Honor." Naomi offered him the same calm smile she had worn all morning. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I am deeply sorry. You've done nothing wrong." Whitmore turned sharply toward Sergeant Dalton. "Remove those handcuffs. Now." Dalton forced a nervous laugh. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding." Whitmore's voice echoed across the plaza. "This is Chief Judge Naomi Carter." The words spread through the crowd like a shockwave. Several attorneys gasped. One federal prosecutor covered his mouth. The television reporter lowered her microphone in complete disbelief before quickly raising it again. "Did he just say Chief Judge?" "Cameras are rolling," her cameraman whispered. "I know." Neither of them stopped recording. Dalton still refused to accept what he was hearing. If she's really Judge Carter, why wasn't she carrying judicial credentials? Naomi answered before Whitmore could. "Because I intentionally left them with my assistant." Dalton frowned. "Why would anyone do that?" "To observe." The single word carried unexpected weight. Whitmore looked at Dalton with visible anger. "The judge personally requested that today's arrival remain confidential." "What?" Only 5 people knew she would arrive without an official escort. Dalton's confidence began to crack. Ethan looked from one face to another, struggling to understand. "You mean?" Whitmore nodded slowly. "This morning wasn't only a swearing-in ceremony." He paused. "It was also an independent evaluation of courthouse security procedures and officer professionalism." Silence. Complete silence. Ethan suddenly remembered every decision he had made during the last 30 minutes. Every question, every assumption, every moment he had ignored his instincts. His stomach tightened. He began. The words wouldn't come. Dalton quickly stepped in. "Sir?" Officer Briggs followed my instructions. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Did he?" Dalton nodded confidently. The woman refused to identify herself. Naomi spoke calmly. "I requested that courthouse administration be contacted." Dalton ignored her. She admitted she had no identification. I explained why. She refused to answer questions. I declined to discuss confidential judicial business in a public plaza. Every sentence Naomi spoke was measured. Every sentence Dalton spoke sounded increasingly defensive. Then another black SUV pulled into the courtyard. 2 officials from the Judicial Security Division stepped out carrying slim electronic tablets. One of them walked directly toward Whitmore. "Sir, we've already secured the surveillance footage." Dalton looked confused. "Surveillance footage?" The official nodded. "Every camera covering this entrance has been recording since 6 o'clock this morning." Another officer added quietly, "The body cameras too." Dalton's face changed. For the first time, genuine concern replaced arrogance. Ethan noticed it immediately. Nearby, the crowd continued growing. Employees leaned out from courthouse windows. Court clerks gathered behind the glass doors. Reporters spoke rapidly into live cameras. "We're witnessing an extraordinary situation outside the Charlotte Federal Courthouse, where a newly appointed federal judge appears to have been mistakenly detained." Officials are refusing further comment. Within minutes, clips from bystanders had already begun appearing across social media. One video focused entirely on Dalton's mocking remarks. Another captured Naomi standing peacefully while people shouted around her. A third clearly recorded Dalton refusing to let the elderly attorney speak. Inside the courthouse, several judges watched the live stream from a conference room. Judge Harold Benson slowly removed his glasses. Naomi planned to evaluate security. Another judge nodded. "I don't think she expected to evaluate character." Outside, Whitmore carefully stepped toward Naomi. Your Honor. She looked at him. May I remove the handcuffs? Naomi glanced briefly at Ethan. No. Whitmore blinked. No? Not yet. Everyone stared at her. Dalton looked equally surprised. Naomi turned toward Ethan. Officer Briggs. His voice barely worked. Yes, Your Honor. You believed you were protecting this courthouse. Yes. Did anyone force you to ignore your own doubts? Ethan hesitated. He looked toward Dalton. Dalton immediately answered instead. This isn't the time for questions. Naomi's eyes shifted calmly back to the sergeant. It is exactly the time. Dalton fell silent. Naomi waited. Finally, Ethan spoke. I wasn't certain. Why? You cooperated. You remained respectful. You never became aggressive. You asked us to contact courthouse administration. Naomi nodded. What stopped you? Ethan looked down. I didn't want to disappoint my supervisor. The admission hung heavily in the air. Several federal marshals exchanged glances. Whitmore quietly closed his eyes. Naomi spoke gently. Fear can become as dangerous as prejudice when it replaces independent judgment. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I know. You knew? I saw it in your face before you reached for the handcuffs. Those words nearly broke him. She had recognized his uncertainty. She had seen the conflict. And still she had never humiliated him. Instead, she had simply allowed him to reveal the choice he would make. Suddenly, another vehicle entered the plaza. Unlike the others, it bore the seal of the Office of the Inspector General. Dalton's confidence disappeared completely. 3 investigators stepped out carrying identification folders. The lead investigator approached Whitmore. We received authorization to begin immediately. Dalton frowned. Authorization for what? The investigator looked directly at him. The complete review. What review? The courthouse culture assessment. He held up a thick, sealed envelope. This evaluation did not begin today. He opened the file. It began 6 weeks ago. Dalton's face turned pale. What are you talking about? The investigator calmly continued. We have already interviewed 43 courthouse employees. A second investigator added 21 security officers and 12 federal judges. The plaza fell silent again. Ethan slowly turned toward Dalton. The sergeant had told everyone today's operation was about outside threats. But this investigation had never been about outsiders. It had been about the people wearing the uniforms. Naomi finally looked toward Whitmore. Now, she gently lifted her cuffed hands. You may remove them. Whitmore accepted the handcuff key from Ethan with trembling fingers. The metal clicked open. Naomi slowly rubbed her wrists but showed no anger, only quiet disappointment. She looked across the hundreds of silent faces gathered outside the courthouse. This morning, she said softly, has already taught us more than any report ever could. No one dared interrupt, because everyone sensed the hardest truths were only beginning to emerge. The plaza remained eerily silent. Even after the handcuffs had been removed, no one seemed willing to move. Judge Naomi Carter gently rubbed the faint red marks on her wrists before lowering her hands. There was no trace of bitterness on her face. Instead, she looked around the courthouse with quiet disappointment, as though something far more painful than the handcuffs had revealed itself. Inspector Daniel Foster from the Office of the Inspector General stepped beside her. Your Honor, should we move this discussion inside? Naomi slowly shook her head. No. She glanced at the dozens of courthouse employees watching through the glass entrance. They deserve to hear this. She turned toward Sergeant Mark Dalton. Sergeant, may I ask you a question? Dalton forced himself to stand straight despite the sweat gathering on his forehead. Of course. When Officer Briggs suggested contacting courthouse administration, Naomi paused. Why did you refuse? Dalton answered quickly. Because we couldn't take risks. Naomi nodded slightly. Interesting. She looked toward Inspector Foster. Please read entry 17. Foster opened the thick investigation folder. The evaluation began 6 weeks ago under authorization from the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. He turned several pages. Entry 17 documents 5 separate incidents in which courthouse security officers requested supervisor approval to verify visitors' identities through internal administration. He looked directly at Dalton. Each request was denied by Sergeant Dalton. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Dalton's jaw tightened. Those were judgment calls. Were they? Naomi asked calmly. Foster continued reading. In 4 of those 5 cases, the visitors were later confirmed to be judges, prosecutors, or federal employees. The plaza became even quieter. Ethan slowly looked toward Dalton. You never told us that. Dalton immediately answered. Those situations were resolved. No, Foster corrected. They were hidden. That single sentence struck harder than any accusation. Nearby, reporters began scribbling notes as cameras zoomed closer. Dalton looked increasingly uncomfortable. This is being taken out of context. Then let's provide context, Naomi replied. She turned toward Ethan. Officer Briggs. Yes, Your Honor. When you asked permission to verify my identity, I did. What happened? Ethan hesitated only briefly. I was told it wasn't necessary. And why wasn't it necessary? He looked at Dalton before answering. Because Sergeant Dalton said his instincts were enough. Naomi slowly nodded. The law was never designed to replace evidence with instinct. Those words echoed through the plaza. A young deputy marshal standing near the courthouse doors quietly lowered his head. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances. Many of them had heard Dalton repeat that phrase countless times. Trust your instincts. It had become unofficial policy. Inspector Foster opened another section of the report. Entry 24. He looked around before continuing. Anonymous employee interviews describe a culture where officers feared questioning supervisory decisions. He read another sentence. If you disagreed with Sergeant Dalton, you were labeled weak. Another page. Officers stopped asking questions because promotions depended on obedience. Ethan felt his stomach sink. Every sentence described exactly what had happened that morning. He hadn't arrested Naomi because she had threatened anyone. He had arrested her because he had been afraid to disagree. Naomi quietly studied his expression. You've realized something. Ethan nodded slowly. I kept telling myself I was following orders. And now, I think. His voice cracked. I stopped thinking for myself. Naomi offered him a small, understanding smile. That realization may save your career. Dalton suddenly stepped forward. This is unfair. Every eye turned toward him. You can't blame an entire department for one misunderstanding. Inspector Foster calmly closed the investigation file. This morning wasn't one misunderstanding. He reached into another envelope. It was confirmation. Dalton frowned. Confirmation of what? Foster handed several printed photographs to Whitmore, one after another. Visitors, employees, courthouse contractors, all standing outside the same entrance over the previous month. Each image carried handwritten notes. Delayed, publicly questioned, denied verification request, supervisor intervened. Whitmore's face grew darker with every page. These are all connected? Foster nodded. The same supervisor, the same pattern, the same assumptions, Naomi quietly added, and the same result. The realization spread through the crowd. People weren't witnessing one officer making one mistake. They were watching the collapse of an entire workplace culture. At that moment, Rebecca Lawson finally hurried across the plaza, carrying Naomi's official judicial credentials. She stopped abruptly after seeing the investigators, the cameras, and the hundreds of silent spectators. Oh my God! She rushed toward Naomi. Judge Carter, I'm so sorry. Traffic was completely blocked. Naomi gently squeezed her arm. This was never your fault. Rebecca opened the leather briefcase and removed the official identification wallet. The gold federal judicial seal reflected in the morning sunlight. Several officers instinctively stood straighter. The badge represented decades of legal service, thousands of carefully reasoned decisions, and one of the highest offices in the federal judiciary. Yet only 30 minutes earlier, the woman carrying that authority had been treated like a criminal because no one had bothered to verify the truth. Ethan could barely look at her. I should have waited. Naomi answered softly. Yes, I should have called administration. Yes, I should have listened instead of assuming. Again, she nodded. Yes, there was no anger, only honesty. For Ethan, that was somehow even harder to bear. A federal marshal approached Whitmore. Sir, what is it? The ceremony begins in 25 minutes. Whitmore looked toward Naomi. Your Honor, should we postpone it? Naomi gazed at the courthouse entrance, where dozens of employees were still silently watching. No. She spoke with quiet certainty. If today's ceremony is postponed, she glanced briefly at Ethan, then today's lesson will remain unfinished. Inspector Foster closed his folder. The remaining interviews will continue after the ceremony. Dalton immediately interrupted. I'm willing to cooperate. Foster looked directly into his eyes. You won't have a choice. Before Dalton could respond, two internal affairs officers quietly approached him from behind. One spoke in a calm, professional voice. Sergeant Mark Dalton. He removed an official document from a sealed envelope. Effective immediately, you are relieved of supervisory authority pending the outcome of this investigation. Dalton's face lost all color. Around the plaza, stunned silence returned once again. But Naomi's eyes never left Ethan, because she knew the greatest test of character had not yet begun. The courthouse plaza slowly began to clear, but the tension refused to leave. Reporters remained behind the barricades, broadcasting live as courthouse employees whispered among themselves. Inside, the grand ceremonial courtroom was being prepared for Judge Naomi Carter's swearing-in, yet hardly anyone talked about the ceremony anymore. They talked about the handcuffs, they talked about Sergeant Mark Dalton, and they talked about the young rookie officer standing alone beside the courthouse steps, unable to forgive himself. Officer Ethan Briggs had removed his duty belt and rested it on a nearby bench. For the first time since graduating from the academy, the badge on his uniform felt unbearably heavy. He stared at the polished metal badge clipped to his chest. His father's words echoed endlessly. "The badge doesn't prove you're honorable, son. Every decision does." Those words had never hurt more. Several feet away, Sergeant Dalton was being questioned by internal affairs investigators. Although stripped of his supervisory authority, he still carried the confidence of a man unwilling to admit defeat. "This entire situation is ridiculous," Dalton snapped. "I followed protocol." Investigator Daniel Foster calmly looked through another file. "Which protocol? The one that keeps federal judges alive?" "No." Foster looked directly into Dalton's eyes. "You followed your own instincts." Dalton folded his arms. "Experience matters." "It does. But evidence matters more." Dalton laughed bitterly. "So now everyone suddenly believes I created this entire problem?" Foster quietly slid another document across the table. "No. This created the problem." Dalton looked down. His own signature appeared at the bottom of a departmental memorandum issued nearly 8 months earlier. "Field discretion shall take priority when immediate verification may cause delay." Dalton's expression tightened. "I wrote that." "We know. You approved it." "No." Foster tapped the page. "You approved it yourself." Dalton's face stiffened. The memorandum had never been reviewed by courthouse administration. He had quietly introduced the policy during shift meetings until officers accepted it as standard practice. Ethan overheard every word. A chill ran down his spine. He remembered Dalton repeating those exact instructions dozens of times. "Don't waste time calling administration. Trust your instincts. Authority hesitates. Criminals don't." Until today, he had never questioned them. Across the hallway, Naomi Carter quietly watched through the courtroom windows. Rebecca Lawson approached carefully. "Your Honor?" Naomi didn't look away. "What do you see?" Rebecca followed her gaze toward Ethan. "I see a young officer who made a terrible mistake." Naomi nodded. "I see something else." "What?" "A man deciding what kind of officer he'll become." Rebecca frowned. "You still believe in him?" "I believe in choices." She paused. People reveal themselves most honestly after failure. Meanwhile, Dalton noticed Ethan standing alone. Ignoring the investigators for a moment, he walked directly toward the rookie. "Don't stand there looking guilty." Ethan slowly raised his eyes. "I made the arrest." "No." Dalton lowered his voice. "I gave the order. You told me to ignore my doubts." "And you did." Dalton smirked. "So stop pretending you're some innocent victim." Ethan stared silently. Dalton leaned closer. "Listen carefully." His voice became almost threatening. "When this investigation is over, they'll need someone to blame." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "They won't destroy a veteran with 23 years of service." Dalton looked him straight in the eye. "They'll sacrifice the rookie." The words landed like a punch. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. Fear returned, the same fear that had controlled him earlier that morning. Dalton recognized it immediately. Smart officers survive. He straightened his jacket. "Tell them you acted on your own." Ethan blinked. "What?" "You heard me. You want me to lie?" Dalton shrugged. "You'll keep your career." "And you?" "I'll keep mine." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. The man who had spent months preaching loyalty was now asking him to shoulder the blame alone. Before Ethan could answer, another voice interrupted. "Officer Briggs." Both men turned. Judge Naomi Carter was walking toward them. The plaza became quiet again. Even investigators stopped speaking. Naomi looked first at Dalton, then at Ethan. Finally, she addressed the young officer. "May I speak with you privately?" Dalton immediately objected. "This conversation concerns an active investigation." Naomi calmly replied, "So does yours." The investigators gently stepped between Dalton and Ethan. "Sergeant, we'd like you to remain with us." Dalton had no choice. He walked away, though not before giving Ethan one final warning glance. Naomi and Ethan slowly crossed the courtyard toward a small memorial garden dedicated to fallen law enforcement officers. Neither spoke for several moments. Birds chirped softly above them. The sounds of reporters faded into the distance. Ethan finally broke the silence. "I don't deserve your kindness." Naomi looked at the engraved names on the memorial wall. "My father was a police officer." Ethan looked surprised. "He served 32 years. I didn't know. Most people don't." She smiled faintly. He taught me something before my first day of. She turned toward Ethan. He said there are two kinds of officers. Ethan listened carefully. Those who protect the badge, and those who let the badge protect them. The words struck him immediately. Naomi continued. This morning, you let fear protect you. Ethan lowered his head. I know. But fear doesn't have to define the rest of your career. He looked at her. What if they fire me? Then accept it. What? Accept responsibility. She spoke without hesitation, but never accept a lie. Ethan understood instantly what she meant. Dalton wanted him to lie. Naomi wanted him to tell the truth, whatever the cost. A courthouse bell echoed through the building. Rebecca appeared at the garden entrance. Your Honor. She smiled warmly. It's time. The swearing-in ceremony was about to begin. Naomi nodded before looking back at Ethan one final time. In a few minutes, you'll be assigned to stand inside my courtroom. Ethan's eyes widened. After what happened? Yes. Why? Because today isn't about rewarding perfection. She gently straightened the slightly crooked edge of his uniform collar. It's about discovering whether integrity still exists after failure. She walked away without another word. Ethan remained standing in the memorial garden long after she disappeared inside the courthouse. He reached into his pocket. There, folded neatly inside his notebook, was the written statement Internal Affairs had asked him to complete. For several seconds he stared at the blank page. Then he slowly uncapped his pen. Without looking back toward Sergeant Dalton, he began writing the complete truth. The massive oak doors of Courtroom 1 slowly swung open. Inside, nearly 300 invited guests rose from their seats as the ceremonial orchestra finished the final notes of America the Beautiful. Federal judges in black robes lined the front row. U.S. Marshals stood along the walls. State officials, prosecutors, law school deans, civic leaders, and reporters filled every remaining seat. Only one position remained empty, the chair reserved for the new chief judge. Outside the courtroom, Officer Ethan Briggs stood motionless beside two veteran deputies. His freshly completed statement had already been handed to Internal Affairs. He hadn't softened a single sentence. He admitted ignoring his own judgment. He admitted allowing fear to influence his actions. He admitted placing obedience above justice. No excuse, no blame shifting, just the truth. One deputy marshal quietly leaned toward him. Most rookies would have blamed someone else. Ethan stared ahead. I almost did. But you didn't. No. The deputy gave a small nod. That matters. Across the hallway, Sergeant Mark Dalton watched from behind two Internal Affairs investigators. His service weapon, badge, and supervisory credentials had already been surrendered. Yet anger still burned across his face. He watched Ethan with open resentment. You've ruined both our careers, he muttered. Ethan didn't answer. Dalton laughed bitterly. You think telling the truth will save you? It isn't about saving me. No? Ethan slowly turned toward him. It's about making sure this never happens again. For the first time all morning, Dalton had no response. A courthouse clerk stepped into the hallway. Officer Briggs. Yes? The chief judge has requested that you accompany her into the courtroom. Every conversation stopped. One reporter whispered, Did she ask for him specifically? Another replied, Apparently. Even Dalton looked stunned. After everything that's happened, the clerk simply nodded. Those were her instructions. Seconds later, the private hallway door opened. Judge Naomi Carter emerged wearing the traditional black judicial robe she had not worn all morning. The transformation was breathtaking. The simple cardigan was gone. The modest visitor had become one of the highest-ranking judges in the federal judiciary. The robe flowed gracefully as she walked, displaying quiet authority that required no announcement. Yet her expression remained exactly the same. Calm, steady, compassionate. She stopped beside Ethan. Officer Briggs. He immediately stood at attention. Your Honor, I have one request. Anything. When we walk through those doors, she looked directly into his eyes. Don't walk behind me. He frowned. I'm sorry? Walk beside me. Ethan looked completely confused. Your Honor, after what I did, you are assigned to protect this courtroom. I don't deserve that responsibility. Naomi answered gently. Responsibility isn't always given because someone has never failed. She paused. Sometimes it's given because they've learned why failure matters. Before Ethan could reply, the ceremonial announcer's voice echoed through the hallway. All rise for the Honorable Judge Naomi Carter. The courtroom doors opened. Every person inside stood. The orchestra fell silent. Judge Naomi Carter began walking forward. After a brief hesitation, Ethan stepped beside her. Hundreds of eyes immediately focused on him. Whispers spread across the courtroom. That's him, the rookie. The officer who arrested her, Television cameras zoomed closer. Reporters prepared their headlines. No one understood why Judge Carter had insisted he stand at her side. When they reached the front of the courtroom, Naomi stopped before taking her oath. Instead of facing the audience, she slowly turned toward Ethan. The room became perfectly silent. Officer Briggs. Yes, Your Honor. This morning, her voice carried effortlessly through the courtroom. You placed handcuffs on me. Ethan lowered his eyes. I did. You embarrassed me publicly. Yes. You failed to trust your own judgment. Yes. The silence became almost unbearable. Then Naomi asked one final question. When Internal Affairs gave you the opportunity to protect yourself by blaming someone else, she paused. What did you choose? Ethan slowly looked up. I told the truth, even though it might end your career? Yes. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because justice means nothing if I abandon it the first time it becomes expensive. A quiet murmur swept across the courtroom. Naomi studied him for several seconds before turning toward the audience. Please remember what you have just heard. She slowly faced the hundreds of guests. This young officer made a serious mistake. She let those words settle. But his greatest mistake wasn't placing handcuffs on me. The room remained completely still. It was surrendering his independent judgment. She looked toward the rows of uniformed officers. And his greatest act today, her eyes returned to Ethan, was refusing to surrender his integrity a second time. Many officers quietly lowered their heads. They understood exactly what she meant. Integrity wasn't measured by never making mistakes. It was measured by what happened afterward. Chief Justice William Harrison stepped forward carrying the official oath of office. He smiled warmly at Naomi. Judge Carter. She nodded. I'm ready. As she placed her hand upon the Constitution and prepared to swear the oath, the courtroom doors suddenly opened once again. Inspector Daniel Foster entered carrying another sealed evidence folder. He approached Chief Justice Harrison and whispered only a few words. Harrison's expression changed instantly. He looked toward Naomi, then toward Sergeant Dalton standing under supervision near the back of the courtroom. The Chief Justice slowly closed the oath book. I'm afraid. His voice echoed across the silent courtroom. There is one final matter that must be addressed before this ceremony can continue. Every eye turned toward Dalton. The veteran sergeant's confidence disappeared completely because the final evidence had just arrived. And this time, it wasn't about bad judgment. It was about deliberate misconduct. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. No one moved. No one even seemed willing to breathe. Chief Justice William Harrison looked at the sealed evidence folder Inspector Daniel Foster had just placed in his hands. After reading only the first page, his expression hardened. He slowly closed the folder. Inspector Foster, he said solemnly, for the record, what has just been delivered? Foster stepped forward. Your Honor, these are the final findings from the Office of the Inspector General. He looked directly toward Sergeant Mark Dalton. The evidence confirms that today's incident was not simply the result of poor judgment. Dalton immediately interrupted. I object to that characterization. You are not in a position to object, Harrison replied firmly. The courtroom grew even quieter. Foster opened the file. Our digital forensic team completed its review of body camera recordings, surveillance footage, internal emails, and supervisory directives approximately 20 minutes ago. Large courtroom monitors came to life. The first video appeared. It showed Ethan speaking quietly outside the courthouse. Sergeant, perhaps we should contact courthouse administration first. The recording was perfectly clear. Then Dalton's voice followed. No, my instincts are enough. The video paused. Foster looked toward the audience. Officer Briggs proposed verification. He changed the screen. A second body camera recording appeared. Sergeant, maybe we should wait for her assistant. Dalton answered immediately. Do you want your career to end before it starts? A murmur spread through the courtroom. Judge Harrison leaned forward. So Officer Briggs attempted to slow the situation twice. Correct. And both times, he was overruled. Dalton stepped forward. I was making command decisions. Foster calmly selected another video. The courtroom speakers filled with Dalton's own voice. Trust me, we don't need administration. We don't need verification. We need action. Another pause. Foster turned toward the jury-style audience of judges and officials. That statement directly violated written courthouse security policy. Dalton's confidence began slipping away. I was protecting the courthouse. No. Naomi Carter spoke for the first time since the hearing had begun. You were protecting your ego. Every head turned toward her. She remained calm. I have spent 27 years on the bench. She slowly walked toward the center of the courtroom. I have seen honest mistakes. She looked at Ethan, and I have seen arrogance disguised as confidence. Her eyes shifted toward Dalton. They are not the same. Dalton clenched his jaw. You embarrassed me in front of this entire city. Naomi answered quietly. No, you embarrassed yourself. Several people lowered their eyes. The words carried more weight because they were spoken without anger. Inspector Foster opened another section of the report. Your Honor. He displayed several emails on the courtroom screen. During the investigation, we recovered internal communications sent by Sergeant Dalton over the past 11 months. One email appeared. Stop bothering administration. Handle it yourselves. Another. Questions slow officers down. Instinct wins. Another. I don't promote officers who hesitate. Judge Harrison slowly removed his reading glasses. So this wasn't one conversation. No, Your Honor. It became workplace culture. Exactly. The room remained silent. Then Foster displayed one final document. This is perhaps the most significant evidence. It was an anonymous employee complaint submitted 8 months earlier. The complaint warned that Dalton regularly discouraged verification procedures and publicly mocked officers who questioned him. Judge Harrison looked toward Foster. What happened after this complaint? It was closed. Why? Because Sergeant Dalton was assigned to review complaints filed against Sergeant Dalton. Several judges exchanged stunned looks. Naomi quietly shook her head. So the system protected itself. Foster nodded. Until today, Ethan felt the full weight of those words. This had never been about one officer making one poor decision. It had been about a system allowing poor leadership to continue unchecked. Dalton finally realized there was nowhere left to hide. He turned toward Ethan. This wouldn't have happened if you'd simply backed me. The courtroom fell silent once again. Everyone waited for Ethan's response. The young officer slowly stood. For the first time that day, his voice never shook. No, Sergeant. He looked directly into Dalton's eyes. It happened because I stopped thinking. He turned toward Judge Carter. I believed following orders automatically meant doing the right thing. He took a slow breath. I was wrong. He faced the courtroom. I placed those handcuffs on Judge Carter. I will carry that responsibility for the rest of my career. But I won't carry someone else's choices. Dalton stared at him in disbelief. You ungrateful kid. No, Ethan answered quietly. My father taught me that loyalty without integrity is just another form of cowardice. No one spoke. The statement echoed through the courtroom with remarkable force. Chief Justice Harrison slowly stood. Sergeant Mark Dalton. Dalton straightened instinctively. Based upon the findings presented today, Harrison paused briefly. You are hereby terminated from courthouse security effective immediately. The room remained silent. You are further referred to the Office of Professional Responsibility for investigation into abuse of authority, policy violations, retaliation against subordinate officers, and obstruction of internal reporting procedures. 2 federal marshals immediately stepped forward. Dalton looked around the courtroom. No one came to his defense. Not a single officer, not one employee. As the marshals escorted him toward the exit, he glanced back one final time. Naomi simply watched quietly. She felt no satisfaction, only relief. When the courtroom doors closed behind Dalton, Chief Justice Harrison looked toward Ethan. Officer Briggs. Yes, Your Honor. Your disciplinary review will proceed separately. I understand. But this court also recognizes something equally important. Ethan waited. You accepted responsibility before anyone forced you to. Naomi smiled gently. And justice always begins there. The courtroom remained standing. For the first time all morning, the atmosphere no longer felt heavy. It felt honest. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. And with the truth finally revealed, justice could at last begin. For several long moments after Sergeant Mark Dalton was escorted from the courtroom, no one spoke. The heavy wooden doors closed behind him with a deep echo that seemed to mark the end of more than one man's career. It marked the end of a culture that had survived for far too long. Chief Justice William Harrison looked around the packed courtroom before returning his attention to Naomi Carter. Judge Carter, he said quietly, shall we continue? Naomi smiled. Yes. Justice delayed long enough today should not be delayed any further. A faint ripple of relieved laughter spread through the room. The unbearable tension that had filled the courthouse all morning slowly began to dissolve. The oath book was placed before Naomi once more. She rested one hand upon the Constitution while raising the other. I, Naomi Elise Carter, do solemnly swear. Her voice was calm, clear, steady. Every word carried the weight of a lifetime devoted to the law. When she finished, the courtroom erupted into sustained applause. Federal judges stood first, then the marshals, then every attorney. Within seconds, every person inside the courtroom was on their feet. not because she had become chief judge, but because she had demonstrated exactly why she deserved the position. As the applause faded, Chief Judge Naomi Carter stepped to the podium for her first official address. She looked across the audience before speaking. This morning, many people expected a celebration. She paused. Instead, they witnessed a failure. No one looked away, but failures are not always tragedies. She slowly scanned the courtroom. Sometimes they become mirrors. They reveal who we are and who we still have the courage to become. Her eyes settled briefly on Ethan Briggs. This courthouse does not exist to protect powerful people. It exists to protect equal justice. If our procedures only work for those wearing expensive suits, then our procedures have already failed. Several judges nodded quietly. Many officers lowered their heads. Naomi continued, I was not humiliated because I wore handcuffs. She gently lifted one wrist where the faint red marks had nearly disappeared. I would have been humiliated if everyone here had watched the truth unfold and learned nothing from it. The courtroom remained silent. Her words carried more authority than any legal order. She turned toward Inspector Daniel Foster. I will formally recommend 3 immediate reforms. Foster nodded. I'm listening. First, she raised one finger. No visitor shall ever be denied identity verification through courthouse administration when verification is reasonably available. He wrote quickly. Second, every courthouse security officer, from rookies to supervisors, will receive annual training on implicit bias, constitutional authority, and independent professional judgment. Again, he nodded. And third, her voice softened. No supervisor shall ever investigate complaints filed against themselves or anyone within their direct chain of command. The room broke into applause once again. Judge Harrison smiled. Those recommendations will be adopted immediately. The announcement drew another standing ovation. Meanwhile, Ethan remained quietly beside the courtroom wall. He never expected anyone to look his way again. Instead, Chief Judge Carter called his name. Officer Briggs. He stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor. She faced the audience. This officer made a serious mistake. Ethan lowered his eyes. But he also did something increasingly rare. She continued. When given every opportunity to protect himself, he chose honesty instead. She looked directly at him. Officer Briggs. Yes, ma'am. I cannot erase what happened this morning. No, neither can you. No, Your Honor. But I can decide what this courthouse rewards. The entire room watched. I do not reward perfection. She smiled warmly. I reward integrity. She reached into a folder handed to her by Rebecca Lawson. Inside was a neatly folded letter. I have reviewed the recommendations submitted jointly by the Office of the Inspector General and Judicial Security. She unfolded it. Officer Ethan Briggs. He looked up. Your probationary status will remain in place. His heart sank. She continued. You will complete additional constitutional training, community engagement service, and judicial ethics education over the next 6 months. I understand. If you successfully complete that program, she smiled, I will personally recommend that you remain assigned to courthouse judicial protection. Ethan blinked in disbelief. You would trust me again? Naomi answered without hesitation. I already do. He felt tears gathering in his eyes. But why? Because I no longer wonder what you will do when nobody is watching. She paused. I saw what you did when telling the truth could cost you everything. The courtroom applauded again. Several veteran marshals smiled proudly. One quietly whispered, that's how real leaders build people. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded employees as news alerts spread nationwide. Chief Judge turns wrongful detention into sweeping courthouse reform. Rookie officer tells truth. Exposes culture of fear. Supervisor removed after investigation reveals years of misconduct. Within hours, millions of people had watched the videos recorded that morning. Most expected outrage. Instead, they found something deeper. A lesson. Months later, courthouse employees noticed remarkable changes. Security officers no longer feared asking questions. Supervisors encouraged verification instead of assumptions. Complaints were reviewed independently. New recruits studied the Carter incident during orientation not as a story about embarrassment, but as a lesson about courage, humility, and accountability. Officer Ethan Briggs completed every hour of additional training. He volunteered at community legal education events on weekends. He visited local schools, speaking honestly about the responsibility that comes with wearing a badge. He never hid what had happened. He used it to remind others that authority without humility can become dangerous. One quiet autumn morning, nearly a year after the incident, Ethan stood once again outside the same courthouse entrance. A nervous elderly visitor approached him. I'm sorry, the man said. I think I left my identification at home. Instead of reaching for his handcuffs, Ethan smiled. No problem, sir. We'll verify your identity together. The elderly man smiled with relief. Thank you, officer. As they walked toward the administration desk, Chief Judge Naomi Carter happened to pass through the lobby. Their eyes met. She offered a small nod. Ethan returned it. No words were necessary. Both understood that the greatest victory from that unforgettable morning had never been the removal of one corrupt supervisor. It had been the transformation of everyone willing to learn from the truth. Sometimes justice punishes. Sometimes justice restores. And on the rarest days, it accomplishes both. True justice is not measured by never making mistakes. It is measured by the courage to admit them, learn from them, and protect others from repeating them. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe dignity and truth still matter, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories.